समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Does the name HC Gupta ring a bell? If it doesn't, it means three things. One, that you haven't been reading the newspapers carefully. Two, you don't particularly care for what fate befalls straightforward and honest public servants, while legions of truly corrupt get away. And three, that you should then stop complaining about economic reforms not picking up pace in India or that they run into bureaucratic hurdles or roadblocks. We know that HC Gupta is a common enough name. And no, he's no relation of mine, though, by the way, I do have a much loved uncle by that name. But you know, Gupta is a common enough second name. When we used to have paper directories, printed directories, the Delhi phone directory had 42 pages of Guptas, and I wasn't even there. So you might say that HC Gupta, common enough name. So what if I don't know? But this is no ordinary HC Gupta. He is an IAS officer of the 1971 batch who rose to be Union Coal Secretary and has been convicted and given jail sentences in 11 out of the 12 cases filed under the so-called coal mines allocation scam, or Coalgate as it was called. Now, 4 points need to be underlined again. First, none of the 11 cases where he's been convicted, he's been held guilty of having collected any financial or material benefit for himself, nor of having had any intention to commit a crime, or what lawyers call, or what the legal business calls, mens rea, that is the intention to commit a crime. Two, in none of the 11 cases of mine allocations, he was the final or the only deciding authority. The decision was taken by a screening committee. So, if he is guilty for having cleared an undeserving allocation, so is every member of that screening committee, and truth to tell, even the Prime Minister then, Dr. Manmohan Singh. Three, that no disproportionate assets or wealth have been recovered from him. Nothing. Anybody who knows him or has met him can see he has no money. In fact, he had once said in the courtroom that he doesn't have any money to pay for his lawyers, so he'd have no choice but to plead guilty in all the cases, because how can he defend himself? And fourth, most important, unlike the usual, where peers and colleagues, particularly in civil services, completely forget and abandon somebody caught and convicted for corruption, in his case, they've not only spoken up, but are also raising money. They've also raised money for his legal defense, because he, a retiree and pauperized at 74 now, has no money left. How passionately they are speaking up for him, you can check out in a story by Maushmi Das Gupta, my colleague. I'm sharing a link with you with the description of this video. Those speaking for him include his batchmate and former Chief Election Commissioner, S.Y. Qureshi, his successor Coal Secretary Anil Swarup, and former Heavy Industries Secretary Rajan Katoch. This, by the most self-serving, survival first, save your own backside norms of our civil services, is truly unusual. Qureshi also reminds us that he was a brilliant officer with a spotless record, topper in his batch with a score of 600 upon 600 in the subjects he chose. This is a good week for us to take our memories back to 2010-13. The season of scandal mongering that still casts a shadow of Indian politics. And then you might say, who cares about Indian politics or politicians? Politicians can look after themselves or reap as they sow. Important thing is, it holds a curse also on our economy, because all reform ultimately has to go through a bunch of officers who have to put their signatures to a file. And who knows if they worry that 5 years from now, somebody will pop up and say that because of this decision, so and so benefit, not the officers themselves, but somebody benefited unduly, the CBI may come calling. Nobody wants to take that chance. Now, how heavy this curse is became evident early this month also as the bids were closed and paid for 5G spectrum allocation. All of the auction netted less than rupees 1.5 lakh crore. The opposition was up in arms right away, reminding the BJP that the loss from 2007 2G spectrum was valued at 1.76 lakh crore by their favorite national hero or the holy national accountant, which I spelled in capital letters, H capital, N capital, A capital, the holy national accountant Vinod Rai in his storied CAG report. If this much of mere 2G spectrum in 2007 could be worth rupees 1.76 lakh crores. By the way, at that point, people like me had said that this is a nonsensical figure because 1.76 lakh crore in 2007 was $2 billion more than all of India's defense budget. So I said if the value of this much spectrum could be $2 billion, even more than the great Indian Armed Forces defense budget, the fourth largest armed forces in the world, then armed forces sit on so much spectrum. All they have to do is auction a little bit every year and they can buy all these submarines, fighter planes, tanks that they want to buy or missiles, etc., etc. This was a nonsensical figure. So the opposition is now asking, how come if this much spectrum, if this much of 2G spectrum could fetch, was valued at 1.76 lakh crore, how come much more of the 5G spectrum fetches less than that 15 years later when the economy and the telecom sector have both grown exponentially and the dollar costs twice as much if not more? This must be a scandal. Of course, I'd stick my neck out and say no, there is no scam in this auction. Remember, I didn't say with 2G that there is no scam. Scam wasn't that the government followed first come first served policy and did not auction. A government decides its policy. The scam could have been because the allegations were that the minister at that point did not follow the first come, first served properly. The investigation, on the other hand, went in some other direction. Investigation started searching for the money that didn't exist. And that's one of the reasons the case fell flat. Now I am sticking my neck out to say that I believe there is no scam in this 5G auction. Just that if there is no scam in this price discovered through a fair auction, isn't there a scam in the value of a fraction of this asset reckoned at much more in 2007? 2007, what was the size of India's economy? What's the price India's telecom sector and economy have paid for this wanton peddling of fictitious math? And if it wasn't fiction, where the hell is the money? 1.76 lakh crores. This auction should have then fetched now 10 lakh crores. 10 lakh crores? You must be out of your mind, Shekhar Gupta, you might tell me, right? But here is why I may not be so. In 2012, the era when the CAG would release its reports in press conferences rather than place them quietly in parliament as the practice should be, it was grandly announced at a press conference no less that a scam several times bigger than 2G had been unearthed by it in coal mine auctions. The initial value put on the scam or the coal scam or what was then called Coalgate was, hold your breath, rupees 10.7 lakh crores. Then I think even the holy accountant in CAG thought that was a bit too much. At the same time, it had to be a large amount. And since the bar had been set at 1.76 lakh crores, ideally it had to be higher than that. So I think they settled on something like 1.86 or 1.87 lakh crores for coal scam. Now you've seen coal mine auctions now at a much later period and see how much money have they fetched. That's why it won't be unreasonable to value the 5G sale at 10 lakh crore. If the CAG had initially valued coal mines at that point at upwards of 10 lakh crores, in fact close to 11 lakh crores, why can't the value of 5G spectrum now be rupees 10 lakh crores? I'm just making a rhetorical point. What's a few zeros between friends? I don't believe for a moment the value should have been 10 lakh crores because these are serious monies. Money, as Dr. Manmohan Singh famously said, money doesn't grow on trees. All you need is some audacious accounting, right? If you follow the principle, what's a few zeros between friends? All you need is some audacious accounting, even notional accounting. The Supreme Court, the champion corruption fighter, which it hasn't been since, jumped in, cancelled the mine allocations going back to 1993. In fact, leapfrogging backwards even beyond the Vajpayee years, to going back to Narasimha Rao years. They announced fresh auctions at some point and ordered CBI inquiries. It was in that maelstrom that HC Gupta, another IAS officer, KS Kropha, who, if I remember correctly, was a joint secretary of the coal ministry, and some others were caught. For sure, the top politicians and the beneficiary corporates mostly got away. As it happened in almost all of those quote-unquote scams in the heyday of the CAG, no money was recovered, not a rupee. In 2G, everybody was acquitted. Nobody's yet been convicted for what was supposed to be a 70,000 crore scam in Commonwealth Games in 2010. At that point, I had said that, look, the total cost of Olympic Games in 2012 in London was reckoned to be 12 billion pounds, which at that point was about this much, about 70,000 crores or a little bit more than that. So if the total cost of London Olympics could be only this much, how could the money made in our little Commonwealth Games be about that much? But anyway, nobody was willing to listen at that point. But nothing's been recovered. Nobody has been convicted in any of those cases yet. Another supposed scandal in that season, I think one respected broadsheet valued it at rupees 9 lakh crore, because you know what? Anything below that wasn't going to make the top headlines now. In what was called the Antriksh Devas deal involving ISRO, it has led to zero recovery and a $1.2 billion international arbitration award against India. The ISRO chief, who was then accused of being responsible for irregularities in the deal, was made to leave his job, but later was admitted to the BJP in 2018. So he's had his Ganga Snan. You can call it the crowning insult to India's good sense and national interest, or cherry on the cake, depending on your appetite for sarcasm. You make your choices. It was only in Colgate that some convictions are taking place. And the victims are those at the lowest end of their decision-making food chain. HC Gupta being the most prominent. Looking at his fate, which civil servant would now be so audacious as to sign a file for privatization or any major reform? Because if you can be sent to jail and be robbed of your retirement and dignity for merely, at worst, making a bad decision, why take any decision in the first place? You're better off being Sir Humphrey Appleby. See it from where HC Gupta sits today. How does all of this matter to him in the first place? He now has 11, I repeat, 11 jail sentences on his head, while every judge convicting him has been clear on one thing, that he made no money, drew no personal, unfair, illicit benefit. At worst, he made an error. More likely, he's the easiest, the most convenient scapegoat, because somebody has to prove कि हाँ एक तो scam हुआ, हमने लोगों को पकड़ा, there was a scam, because everything else has not been proven yet. The problem lies with the old Prevention of Corruption Act, made especially more draconian by successive governments, including the UPA, under pressure of the Anna movement. Section 13(1)(d)(3), you will see the exact number on my screen. Section 13(1)(d)(3) of the Act said, with vicious ambiguity, vicious for the poor victim, with vicious ambiguity, that an officer can be held guilty if he or she, and now I quote exactly from that law, while holding public office as public servant, obtains any, and I use capital letters for any, emphasis is mine, obtains any person, not themselves, any person, any valuable thing or pecuniary advantage without any public interest, unquote. This means that officer could be guilty without guilt. This is precisely what's happened to HC Gupta. Following his early convictions, an alarmed IAS association, IAS association is very powerful. So following his early convictions, they lobbied with the Modi government and had this section rewritten in 2018. Arun Jaitley, I think, was still there. The section now says The officer is guilty only if he intentionally enriches himself illicitly during the period of his office, or if, and I quote again, he dishonestly or fraudulently misappropriated for his benefit, etc., etc., etc. The new change, therefore, makes the law fairer. Yet, in case after case, judges are convicting Gupta under the draconian old law. This is how the system works. And if this is indeed the system, why would an officer today sign a file for a PSU bank privatization? That's why we should stop fretting over bureaucratic roadblocks to reform. Spending your retirement in Tihar jail isn't such a fine prospect.